Here's 10 important points that Father Nix makes. He says you got to note these 10 points well to read before the article of homosexuality in the American Catholic Church, before you understand that. So he says, number one, this is not a gay bashing blog post. I have good friends who have struggled with same-sex attraction. Most of them were smart enough not to enter seminary or religious life. I say smart because it would be stupid to go live with 100 people you're sexually attracted to for over 7 years. I do not believe anyone is born gay. So the correct Catholic term is actually someone who struggles with same-sex attraction.
Yes.
However, for the sake of brevity, I will use the term gay or homosexual. 3, there have always been gays in the priesthood, but this blog post is a cultural evaluation of what is different about the 20th and 21st century. I know a 55-year-old priest who claims that 60% of the priests his age are gay and 80% of the bishops are gay. The priest who told me this is a normal diocesan priest who does not even know the traditional Latin Mass. Many priests and seminarians from several dioceses concur on these admittedly estimated numbers. Number 4. If you can show me any time in church history with as many gays as a Catholic Church in Europe and America currently has, I will give you my vehicle. You giving me numerous quotes from St. Peter Damian in the 11th century is not sufficient. In fact, the fact that we have only one saint repeatedly quoted on this topic from 19 centuries before our own proves to me that we've never had an epidemic of so many homosexuals in the priesthood as today. That's a good point there.
Yep.
Yeah. 5, most seminarians and priests and seminarians under 45 years old in the U.S. are straight, so things are getting better.
Yep.
Good news.
Yeah, it is.
6.
Keep going, Jesse.
80% of the cases of priests raping children came from priests, including now bishops and cardinals, who self-identify as same-sex attracted. And he got an article that proves that.
Yeah.
7, nevertheless, only 1.8% of priests are pedophiles, as proven in another article that he has sourced. 8, this blog post is not about the child abuse in the clergy, but one of the many underlying perversions, namely homosexuality in the priesthood. That is not the exclusive cause of criminal activity, but it is not a factor we can ignore. 9, the blog post is not about the full history of homosexuals in the priesthood, but rather the cultural factors and attacks on the church in the 20th century that created the perfect storm for many homosexuals to enter the Catholic seminaries. 10, the next blog post after this one will have solutions to many of the below problems. 11, Jesus Christ chose 12 fishermen as his first Catholic bishops. Let that reality set in for a minute. Tough, blue-collar workers who never made it to rabbi school were chosen as apostles. To be sure, neither were they impious doofuses. They were tough, blue-collar workers who took their faith seriously, even when they had to say things to our Lord like, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." They thought in black and whites. They thought in black and white like that, not Hegelian grays. By the way, Hegel was a German liberal philosopher who basically said that the rational alone is real to the exclusion of the spiritual. Go ahead, Terry.
And if I could just mention, Father quotes Father Edward Schillebeck. He was one of the Dominican fathers of Vatican II. He was a liberal as they come. He said, we made sure that we used ambiguous phrases during Vatican II so that we can interpret it any way you want to interpret it. And that makes total sense. He says, even in conservative dioceses, there's no order to the Novus Ordo liturgy. Let's just be honest. You can go anywhere and the Mass is going to be a little different.
Yes.
And that's not a good thing. So think about this. Father makes out, he says this, American dioceses have at least one young straight priest who has been suspended from offering public Masses, not because he does the traditional Latin Mass, but because he did the Mass of Vatican II according to the so-called rules of Vatican II. But as Schillebeck admitted, the ambiguity of the Mass of Paul VI was ultimately for chaos in the rules. This does not come from me, but from one of the main players of Vatican II. And let's just be honest, if you have so many options, and then who's to know what is legitimate and what isn't? I've been to Masses, Jesse, and you have too in the last 40, 50 years, and you question, where did that come from? Well, it was his personal opinion. What's he blowing up birthday balloons at Mass? Where's that in the rubrics? It's not. But you see, without anybody disciplining the priests, and if you look at the Roman Missal, it is laid out real clear what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
But when it's not implemented, then they have many problems. And I think this sets right up for people who have same-sex attraction, because what does that say? There's no order? Okay, well then I can do what I want to do because,
Exactly.
I'm free. What did Jesse say about his conscience? Superior...
Privacy of conscience.
Yeah, there you go. My conscience says I can do this because I feel like doing it, and that's not the church of. That's not what Jesus Christ teaches.
Yep. Here's where he goes right to the infiltration. Here's where it starts.
Hit it.
He says, similarly, up until the 20th century, the priesthood was known as the most difficult life that a Catholic man could live. We all know of the constant physical pain felt by the first missionaries to the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Jesuit St. Isaac Jogues or the Franciscan St. Junipero Serra.
Yep.
St. Isaac Jogues had his fingers chewed off by the Iroquois Indians in upstate New York. St. Junipero Serra walked from central Mexico to Southern California after being stung on his heel by a
couple
scorpion.
times.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All to establish missions up and down the California coast. These were tough men.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Before Vatican II, he writes, there was already a small infiltration of homosexuals and communists in the seminaries and religious orders in the U.S. and Europe. People expect this from old school Jesuits and Franciscans, but did you know that bishops in the 19th century led lives as physically challenging? The first bishop of Colorado, Bishop Joseph Machibuef, swept up and down the Front Range, modern day I-25 from Santa Fe to Denver and then back again, establishing missions, fighting off bands of bandits, mountain lions and bears, sleeping in tents, eating little, exposed to the New Mexico heat and the Colorado cold.
Wow.
Bishop Machibuef left France for his challenge in the 19th century and went everywhere with two priests. It was a hard life that only the toughest Catholic Frenchman could endure. Colorado's first parish is established by the first bishop of Colorado, Bishop Machibuef, came at the price of his own body being racked by constant pain.
Wow.
Yet it left him a humble demeanor and an excellent sense of humor. Only the toughest athletes of Europe could become priests in the United States, be it religious or diocesan. Before Vatican II, there was already a small infiltration of homosexuals and communists in the seminaries and religious orders in the United States and Europe. In the 1960s, a French nurse named Mary Carr, took care of a man in a horrible car accident. She found in his briefcase nearly unbelievable evidence that the communists had placed 1,100 men into the Western seminaries for ordination, and they had made it to ordination undetected. The man who died in that car was one of them, and the findings of that mysterious briefcase are in this book. The book's called Anti-Apostle
I read it years
1025.
ago.
The point is that the infiltration of the priesthood of communists, gays, and Freemasons began sometime in the 20th century, significantly before Vatican II. Remember that the point of this blog is simply to show how the culture in the church changed to allow more gays into the priesthood than ever before. Part 2 will be the solutions. Also, remember that this blog is not about the raping of children. Remember that nota bene, number 6 at the beginning of this blog post shows that 80% of priests who harm children were identified as gay.
That's a fact.
Catholicism grows very well in pain and opposition, but by the time John F. Kennedy was president of the U.S., Catholics were no longer sidelined, but rather mainstream. Fighting side by side with Protestants in 2 world wars earned us the respect as equals, as true American citizens. Of course, the Irish Catholic President Kennedy greatly promoted the cause of Catholic popularity in the U.S. and Europe. This is fine too, but it presents a small problem. It's hard to be faithful when things get easy as a Catholic, as the Clear Creek translation of the Bible says in Deuteronomy 32:15, the beloved have become fat and frisky, close quote. Thus, Catholics, and especially priests and bishops, went from unpopular and poor in the 19th century to popular and rich after the Second World War. It came to be that if you want to live in a multi-million-dollar rectory just for offering 1 Mass a day, and you don't want to tell your mother why you don't like women, then the Catholic priesthood might be right for you. I'm looking at an article that has a picture of 3 bishops and their clerics. The bishop in the middle is straight, but I learned, Father Nick says, as a priest, that gentle elbow grab from one bishop to another with a goofy smile is usually a good sign that the cleric is struggling with same-sex attraction. I mean, not struggling.
Well, Jesse, I got to just jump in and say, this is obviously bad. I want to tease everybody right now and say, why don't the current young Orthodox priests blow the whistle on this gay mafia. Like, for example,
Father Nix is doing it.
Yes, he's doing it. But you know what? He's got courage, you see?
Yeah.
And I believe that is the answer. We'll talk more about it.
Father Dave Nix knows how he got here. He writes how so many homosexuals infiltrated the Catholic Church. He says that as if this was not a perfect storm enough, then Vatican II arrived. For nearly 40 years before Vatican II, there was a small creep of modernism, homosexuality, and even communism in the seminaries in North America and South America. Vatican II was not the root of such men in the church, but they certainly hijacked the original documents of the council in the second week of October 1962. The decade that followed Vatican II was not the genesis of gay priests, but it allowed them to live in the open. And here's my guess as to why. All through seminary, Father Nix writes, I was told that there was no change to liturgy or doctrine. Vatican II had just been misimplemented. I repeated this odd mantra and somehow I got ordained. So I arrived at my parish and I do the Mass of Vatican II, according to the rules of Vatican II as faithfully as I could. Then I sadly had 5 parishes in 5 years, repeatedly getting booted for disallowing careless, so-called extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. Only one of those pastors was probably gay, thankfully. But still, I would always end up in the bishop's office quoting the 2004 document, Redemptionis Sacramentum, from John Paul II, against this and countless other abuses. Yep. At the end of 5 years, I had been kicked out of 5 parishes, and I was exhausted. If I expected my reader in previous blogs to pity me for having so many parishes, I now write this to prove a simple point. If a priest, like me, is not allowed to do the Mass of Vatican II, according to the rules of Vatican II in a conservative diocese under 5 conservative pastors, then there is no order to the Novus Ordo Mass. Good point. Yep. He says, let me write that again, this with no exaggeration. Even in conservative dioceses to the Novus Ordo liturgy, this means that the Mass of Vatican II was not just misimplemented, it was written to have no order. The Dutch Dominican father of Vatican II, Father Edward Schillebeck, said, we have used ambiguous phrases during the council and we know how we will interpret them afterwards, close quote. Even in conservative dioceses, there's no order to the Novus Ordo liturgy. I can tell him he's right. I'm in a conservative diocese, Phoenix, and I can tell you, even in the good Novus Ordo parishes, you go from one Novus Ordo parish to another, there's something at least a little bit different. So Father makes a very good point. And he says, let's go right down to the bottom of the article where he says, so what happened to the straight men who were attracted to solid doctrinal parameters? They were kicked out of seminaries in the 1990s. A man who does not believe in any objective order for his sexuality, homosexual sex at best, or child abuse at worst, is going to be attracted to a mass where he, the narcissist, is the only point of reference for entertaining the people. Furthermore, unrepentant gay men prefer the fuzzy doctrine of the post-Vatican II era, for here, every rule can be dispensed for, drum roll, pastoral reasons.
Oh, yeah.
Once the gay, conniving, manipulative priests began to fill seminaries and religious orders in the 1970s, they easily became priests by the 1980s and then bishops by the 1990s. To prove that gay bishops ambitiously helped each other in ladder climbing through the hierarchy would take another 5 blog posts. Always follow the money. Oh, and follow the sex. As we saw in Cardinal McCarrick history, the gay hierarchy purposefully sought out soft or handsome young men and even boys to enter their seminaries for untoward reasons.
And Jesse, if I can just jump in, I mentioned the Jesuit priest who just got booted for his Rupnik, the guy that was out there having sex,
raping nuns,
sisters,
He's raping nuns.
And so, but here's my point: is that the superiors knew all this. Everybody knew that he was doing it. You know what? If he can get away with it, no our power to him. It was only because he got exposed for what he was doing. Here's my question: McCarrick the same way. The people in the church knew McCarrick was doing all these bad things. The reason that wasn't being stopped is because nobody had the guts to say, okay, I'm willing to take it. I'm willing to be a whistleblower in the Catholic Church. That's the problem.
That's right. Father Dave Nix writes, conservative orders like the Legionnaires of Christ were simply smoother about their destruction of the priesthood than the liberals.
Yeah.
It should be noted that this gay perversion and child abuse has even made it a little bit to certain traditional religious congregations that use the traditional Latin Mass. Joseph Siambra reported abuse of children in the traditional Society of St. John decades ago.
Yeah.
He was not fully vindicated until the last chapter of the recently released 2018 Pennsylvania grand jury report. And the article, it shows a picture here of Monsignor Battista Rica and Pope Francis are looking at each other. Monsignor Battista Rica, who was a Vatican diplomat, posted in Montevideo, Uruguay, where he was allegedly caught in an elevator with a male child sex slave.
Oh.
I wonder if he went to go see Sound of Freedom. No, he probably wouldn't like the movie.
No.
Monsignor Rica was later named and is the head of the papal resident at Casa Santa Marta. Monsignor's special friend was reported to a former Swiss guard, "Why don't current young Orthodox priests blow the whistle on this gay mafia?" Because most of the straight guys become cowardly company men under their gay superiors, even when they avoid sexual sins with them. Occasionally, one priest or another has the fortitude to blow the whistle, but when a priest blows a whistle on a gay orgy of other priests, his bishop removes him.
That's how it works. And you know, the book Goodbye Good Men, which we put on cassette tape, it talks about all this going on in the Catholic Church. And I think that for most people who hear this, there's no way that can be going on in the church. Well, I hate to say it. At one point, Jesse, I thought it was an exaggeration. Not anymore, brother.
Yeah, Terry.
I'm red-pilled.
Yeah, I think you and me red-pilled a long time ago. And by the way, you know, Goodbye Good Men, when it came out, most people were saying, this guy's crazy, this guy's, QAnon, where did this guy get this information from? And then little by little, we're starting to see, you start looking at the track record, Terry, and there was other books that were also written. I know there was a very famous Catholic priest, a friend of yours.
Father Enrique Rueda.
Yes. He wrote a book, Terry, where he basically... he documented all of this as well back in the 80s.
Homosexual Network is the title of the book.
And he paid a price for it.
Oh, his life.
And then you also have that Polish priest, that Orthodox Polish priest that came out with a document, basically... it was Pope Benedict had asked him to kind of investigate what's going on in the church. Yeah. And he came out with a 300-page dossier saying the same thing that Father Enrique Rueda said and that Michael Rose said in Goodbye Good Men.
Right.
There's also another book written by another author. The point of the matter is, Terry, there's been people that have been blowing the whistle.
Yeah, it's well documented.
Yeah, well documented. So the article ends by saying, Father Dave Nix says, finally realize that the necessity of gay men running parishes jives very well with an America where women are the spiritual leaders of the families.
Exactly.
Although I blame these scandals entirely on priests, not on families, we must recognize that the breakdown of the family contributed to such rotten priests. Big time. Catholic boys for the past 50 years have been mostly raised by their mothers, not their fathers. This has partly contributed to a mostly gay priesthood. These gay priests furthermore surround themselves with old women in the parish to whom they give much control. It's a symbiotic relationship. The gay priest gets to gossip over coffee with the ladies all morning. In return, the ladies are delegated control of a parish, the next best thing to getting ordained.
Jesse, wow. That's so well said what Father just said there, because... You know, how can you be a spiritual father if your sisters and your mother are the ones who raise you and you don't have a father in your home? It makes no sense. I'm not saying that all priests who don't raise with a father in the home are homosexuals, but what it does is it feminization. There's a feminization that goes on. They don't get their manlyhood. I'll give you an example. My own Archbishop Gomez was raised by his sisters. He had no father when he was raised as a child. I'm not saying he's a homosexual. I'm just saying he doesn't seem to have the guts to speak up on hard issues and to call people in our diocese out when they're wrong, because he seems to not want controversy. And I find that that when you've been feminized by the way you grow up, see, Jesse, we were taught as young men, if you need to fight, you fight. Am I wrong or am I right?
No, that's precisely the point. And Terry, you know, in times past, the church made some very, very strong statements on homosexuality.
1961 was one of them. Said you can't be a priest.
Yeah, and that was under Pope John the 23rd. And the church here in the U.S. just shoved that under the carpet.
Yep, they did.
Because had they enforced that, we wouldn't have the problems that we've had.
Amen, bro.
We wouldn't have paid over $1 billion in lawsuits.
Yep, just in Los Angeles, $1 billion.
Yeah, just in L.A.
$4 billion throughout the country.
I think the oldest place where we see that homosexuality was denounced, again, in the Bible, if you look at divine revelation, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. That's Genesis 19. That's very clear what God thinks about sodomy. But even before that, people also wonder, so why did God destroy the earth at the time of Noah? Well, the Jewish commentary on the book of Genesis by the Jews, by Jewish rabbis at the time of Christ, is called Midrash. Mm-hmm. The Midrash on the book of Genesis, which is the rabbi's commentary at the time of Christ, they say that the generation of the flood at the time of Noah was because there was a rampant sodomy, male to male sex, and also rampant bestiality, man to animal sex.
Oh my God.
That's why God destroyed the earth. Those were the two sins that were rampant. And so, as Catholics, this is divine revelation. I don't know why there's so many prelates today in the Catholic Church, especially those that in the Vatican, they're confused about this. And they're soft on this. And let me tell you, Terry, God was not soft on this.
No, and that's just it. But you see, Jesse, we've got priests like Father James Martin who said that the Bible is wrong, Jess. Those scripture verses in Romans, they're just plain wrong. See, this is why we need strong leadership to call these men out, because if they don't do it, the error will continue. And that's the challenge we pray for our leaders in our church. Yes, Romero, what state should we be living in, brother?
Let's all strive to live in the state of sanctifying grace, pursue a life of holiness, and let's all strive to not live in a state of mortal sin. That's the last state that you want to live in. And remember, keep putting the spotlight of truth upon this culture of death. Let's speak the truth, the power, and live without fear. Terry?